All right. Good evening and welcome everyone to the first Mansfield Dialogue of the fall semester. I'm Keegan Lundman, a recent alumna of University of Montana's History and Russian departments. Last year, I studied Russian for 6 weeks in Kyiv, Ukraine, and I am currently an assistant international program manager at the Mansfield Center. The Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center is committed to issues of ethics and international engagement, and our programs are supported by people like you. We would also like to thank Missoula Community Access Television for recording today's discussion as part of a media assistance grant provided to us. This evening, we are honored to have with us Ms. Yulia Mendel, former spokeswoman and press secretary to Ukrainian President Zelensky. She has been a prominent journalist in Ukraine for the past 15 years and just released her first book detailing her experiences with the Zelensky administration and as a witness to Russia's war against Ukraine. Moderating today's discussion are Dr. Madeline Levine, the primary translator of Mrs. Mendel's new book and Kennan Professor of Slavic Literatures Emerita at UNC Chapel Hill, and Dr. Stephen Levine, a Mansfield Center Senior Fellow and accomplished translator from both Chinese and Russian to English. In the last part of today's session, our speaker will address viewer questions, so please pose your questions in the Q&A box. And Yulia, I will hand things off to you.
Well, thank you so much for this great introduction. But first, let me thank to all the people who made it possible for this conversation happening today. And of course, I'm very grateful to the University of Montana and to the Mansfield Center, but most of all, I'm grateful to Dr. Madeline and Steve Levins. Actually, when this book was written and when it was translated, I think I spent months with them, and they became my online family. When the world was collapsing and when we started our, fight for our lives, Steve and Madeline were in the team there, supporting, listening, insisting, helping, most of all, helping to adapt this book to the international audience. So this is my honor to talk to you today. Not the easiest thing to talk for minutes without having questions, but I will try to tell you the story that I'm trying to share right now with the world. First of all, let me say that I'm native Ukrainian. I was born in Ukraine. I live in Ukraine, and I feel like I'm Ukrainian with every my cell. I was born to a southern region of Ukraine, which is called Kherson, and this is the only region that borders Ukrainian peninsula, Crimea, that Russia annexed back in 2014. I had quite a good childhood, and I spent my first years in one of the villages. It's a very small village. It's called Alexandrivka. And why I'm naming this village, because many people from there, they want me to share this name around the world. They're very proud of this place, and they want to know, that it existed on the map of Ukraine. In Alexandrivka, I had my first steps and said my first words, and I read all the books later in the village library. My grandparents lived there, and Russia fully destroyed this village. And the latest experience which I have 82-year-old grandmother, and she had a wounded leg, and she spent weeks in the basement listening to the missiles, Russian missiles that were destroying her home, her garden, actually all her life. Now she is in Kyiv, and she cannot stop talking about anything else than returning of Kherson. Kherson appeared the first biggest administrative and the only administrative city that Russia captured. But it's one of around 15-20% of Ukrainian territory that is under Russian occupation right now. You know that it happened on 24th of February. We woke up to the sound of bombs that were already going to Kyiv. I live in Kyiv these days. I had education there, and now I'm married there, and I had a mortgage there, you know how it happens. And I had my career built in Kiev. So we woke up to the sound of shelling, and we understood that the war was there. Just before the evening, before, like in 12 hours before this, we had a talk to a representative of the Ukrainian government who said that Russia was coming and that we had less than 24 hours. We did not want to leave. And this is a very big question that many people are asking me these days, and journalists are asking, how is that possible that all Ukrainians had this shared intelligence that the war was coming, but at the same time, people were not prepared? And I have the answer to this because I'm one of those millions of Ukrainians. First of all, with our head, we understood that there was the danger. But with our hearts, it's really absolutely unbelievable to think that someone will behave the way Putin behaves. He not only invaded the country, he not only tried to kill our president, he not only tried to put a puppet regime there, he moved his tanks to Kiev, but he also repeats the whole horrors from 20th century, from the World War II, from artificial famine, from genocidal practices. And this is really a terrible experience. Even today, living in Kiev, I'm talking to ordinary Ukrainians and passing this experience, they don't believe that actually it is happening. But even after we had recent very successful counteroffensive done by Ukrainian army, we see that we found mass graves, and we know that thousands and thousands of Ukrainians were killed, and there is no any kind of justification for this. We can find families and kids, small kids in those graves, and we see the torture cells in the occupied territory. And despite of the fact that we are celebrating this first counteroffensives, at the same time, you know, our hearts bleeding to understand that so many Ukrainians are dying for nothing, for some dictators' ego, for the ghosts of the past, and for the fact that we are the biggest democracy and territory of freedom in post-Soviet region. Yeah, part of my family stays in under Russian occupation, and I would prefer not to talk about that much for the reason to keep them safe. Part of my family was lucky to leave. Our president did an amazing job in terms of this chaos of war. When he said at the beginning of the war that he needs an ammunition, not a right, that was really a call for the world to unite around Ukraine. And even if he was criticized for being a political novice and making mistakes in politics, still he was really doing like great job to unite Ukrainians and to unite the whole civilized world, to help us and to stand with us. It's almost shoulder to shoulder because Ukrainians are very determined to return lands, to defend homes, but at the same time, we don't have resources. And that's why it's very important that the European Union and the United States had this absolutely not doubtful position to help us fight one of the most unpredictable and aggressive autocracies of today's international relations. But how did I manage to work with President Zelensky? Let me say this absolutely crazy story of peaceful time of Ukraine. So when President Zelensky came to power back in 2019, he was very popular. He was as popular as a rock star, and it felt like every Ukrainian wanted to work for him. He is a person who built his business by meritocracy on meritocratic rules, and he wanted to open this meritocracy in Ukrainian politics. So he became the first president to open transparent competitions for many political positions. And one of them was the position of his press secretary. He literally went to Facebook and announced that he was going to select his press secretary just in Facebook. And I didn't believe first that there was the chance to, apply and to win this competition, for the reason that Ukraine was so well introduced to nepotism that, you never could imagine that, there could be such kind of a transparent competition. But actually it was. I applied and I passed several stages of competition done by HR company. And the latest my stage was to have a conversation with the president and his team. And the president came in jeans and t-shirt on Saturday to interview me. I thought, okay, even if I don't pass, then already it's a great memoir, that the president of the country comes to the office on Saturday to interview me. He and his team, around 8 people, were playing media sharks, and they were testing me if I knew anything about economy, politics, the biggest scandals that were happening. Did I know English? All these details. And then President Zelensky asked me one question, and I think that was a defining question for him. He asked me about my motivation to become his press secretary. And I improvised. I thought, if he was a president from some modest background, from some province in Ukraine, and he could become the president of the country, and then if I were a journalist from a poor background, from another region, and in a transparent way, I could become his press secretary, then what is it if not a Ukrainian dream, where everyone can achieve whatever he or she wants? And I think he liked that answer. And I think he understood that we were sharing the same vision of the country. And that's how I became his press secretary from over 4,000 of applicants. And I served with him for 25 months. When people are asking me why I left, I'm always saying that James Psaki was in the position for 15 months. And the average time when people serve at State Department is 18 months. It's a very demanding job. And the first year I was sleeping for 3-4 hours. But I'm very happy that I had this experience. And I'm telling a lot about it in the book, The Fight of Our Lives. I'm telling about my service with President Zelensky, our travels to Donbass, our travels around the country, and in foreign trips where we met a lot of people, leaders, Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, Putin, or Donald Trump. There were a lot of big names with whom I handshaked or was present at the negotiations. So I'm trying to put all of that there to explain how it looked like from Ukrainian perspective and what it meant for the world. But also I'm trying to show why this path towards democracy for Ukraine was so difficult and chaotic, but why also I'm so proud being the young generation of Ukraine to be the part of my country and to belong to that blend. I don't know, do I speak for 15 minutes already? Is that enough? Because I can speak a lot and a lot. Madeline, Steve, what do you think? Can we switch to questions or you want me to continue?
Well, maybe we should go to questions, and Steve is going to begin, but before he does, I don't want to just wait to talk to you. And the first thing I want to say, you'll forgive my accent, laskovo prosimo do Montana, Julia.
That's a fantastic accent.
A warm welcome to Montana. And one day we are going to meet in person. As Julia said, we have come to know each other quite well as email can do, and the occasional Skype call. But someday we're going to hug in Kyiv. That's the plan.
Okay, I will welcome you.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to move out of the way. For the audience, we've had a little computer problem, so we're sharing a screen.
Okay.
Thank you, Madeline.
Well, yeah, Madeline will be back in a little while. Okay, I promise. So first of all, I want to also welcome you on behalf of the Mansfield Center, which I've been associated with for many years. And I think it's wonderful that they're having this program with you. The other thing I'd like, before I start asking questions, is that in preparation for this, I reread your book, even though I translated half of it. I also reread it just now. And I'm a very cynical old man, but I was extremely moved, inspired, particularly by your last chapter, but by the whole book. And that doesn't happen to me very often. So that's really a tribute to you and to Ukraine and for the fight that you and your fellow countrymen are fighting. It's really amazing. So let me start, though, picking up on one thing that you said, namely international response to Russia's aggression against your country. It's true that the West and some other countries have helped, but that help came rather late. And in fact, there are some pages in your book in which you're critical of the slowness and the insufficiency of the Western response. I agree with that criticism, by the way. But a lot of the world has still not responded positively to it, to the aggression, and has sort of ignored it. And I wondered how you think about that and whether there's anything Ukraine could do to try to convince the fence sitters, you might say, the people who haven't noticed, who haven't seen how important your struggle is.
Well, thank you. That's a difficult question, to be frank. I think that the message Ukraine tried to share the message as much as possible around the world. And we really united as one organism trying to fight some deadly virus. And to appeal to the world, saying like we are dying here, because that's exactly what we saw around us, death and destruction. The fact is that what Ukraine is trying to achieve is trying to show the world that we are a reliable partner. Right now, you're right that, probably the way how the help, the aid came was slow because of bureaucracy, because, of different processes. At the same time, I'm often asked, when will it be enough? And the answer is that it is enough when the war is over. Russia is doing terrible things in my country, literally terrible, killing thousands and thousands of people. And if we want that democracy stands stronger than autocracy, then we will need to finish this fight, and to finish it with the victory of democracy. So enough will be when Russia stops killing, sending missiles, torturing people, when Russian servicemen, Russian army leaves Ukraine. But also it's very important to hold Russia accountable. We read about a lot of conflicts. We know about a lot of military interactions. And it's really a big thing when a victim, a target, people, they stay without, just we need to forget and forgive. It's not how democracy or justice works in the world. So, of course, Ukraine tries to call for the tribunal for all those people who act as actually trying to return the practices of fascism from 20th century. And also Ukraine is trying right now to mobilize the world to try to use Russian resources to rebuild Ukraine. It's really very important for the reason that Russia used a lot of money for these destructions and killings. And right now, a lot of these resources, they are arrested, and it will be justice if these resources go to Ukraine to rebuild infrastructure and to help those people who really suffered. And it's not only about homes or infrastructure, it's also about people who lost their beloved ones. The stories that go there, they are like heartbreaking. Like, I'm trying to post some of them. For instance, the story of a female who was happily married for 10 years and she wanted to have kids with her husband for 8 years. And she was on the 9th month of pregnancy when the war started. And he was serving as a border guard. And he was killed, one of the first killed by Russia. And then she delivered kids. He never saw her twins. So, I shared the story of a man who had all his family killed in one shot. It was Russian missile that hit his house, and he had 2 kids, 2 grandchildren, and all of them died immediately, and a wife whom he loved very much. So I think, no finances can ever cover this pain or allow people to forget or forgive. But at the same time, they need to have some kind of compensation, to have a hope that they can at least somehow live the life. And that's why we try to talk to the world not only about the weaponry right now, but also about the future of Ukraine, where Russia would be held accountable, and when we can use the finances of Russia, not using Western money, but Russian money, to rebuild all those horrors and destruction that Russia has done. So we try to use all the platforms, and President Zelensky was really a very good one in trying to share the world with all the world communities. But it's also about the morale of the world and the media to give the platforms and, you know, to help Ukraine to make our voices being heard.
Yeah,
Hope
thank
I
you.
answered.
Yeah, no, it's a very good answer. The problem, of course, let me just make a quick observation, is that because the United Nations is structured in such a way that both Russia and China have veto powers, any kind of an international tribunal or international aid will have to be structured outside of the community of the United Nations. That is possible, to be sure. And there's certainly precedents for losing powers like Germany and Japan after World War II to pay indemnities and help reconstruct, but that's problematic in this case. But in the short term, what kinds of additional support do you think that Ukraine needs right now and in the immediate future, let's say in the next 3 months?
Well, first of all, yes, thank you. First of all, I completely agree with everyone who says that we need weapons, because weapons, they have the tendency to run out. Ammunition and modern weapons, you know, I had this very cynical person, probably it's bad to say, but one cynical person in Ukraine from the government said it feels like the West watches this war as if there are like two underdeveloped tribes just killing each other, for the reason that both of us were using just, you know, Soviet weapons, and we couldn't achieve a result at the first, no, neither of us. But then when we started getting not only the weaponry, modern weaponry, but also training for this weaponry and ammunition for this weaponry, we showed the results. Again, we are very determined to finish the war and to regain our territories. 1.2 million of Ukrainians are staying right now under Russian occupation. So we actually can achieve the things, but weaponry is very important, especially before winter. Second thing, oh my God, we are very grateful for all the finances, because the budget system of Ukraine really suffers a lot. And perhaps we are looking forward to establish the system of investment that would be perhaps interesting for the Western world too, you know, and perhaps we'll have good insurance so that we can save this investment back in Ukraine, because this is the only way to attract those investment that could actually boost different spheres of Ukraine's economy. That's actually, you know, the biggest things that we need. I know that there are negotiations with the IMF. We hope for some green light in the nearest future. Yeah, these are like big things. And we are very grateful. You know, I see here in the United States that people take this story personally. And I think this happens because America actually, you know, for us has always been the example of freedom. And for you, for every person, freedom is a fundamental value. And for Ukrainians, it's exactly the same. Despite of our Soviet past, we have always thought that freedom is fundamental for building the state.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Ukraine's fight has done is to remind Americans about how precious freedom is. We tend to take it for granted. We fought our war for independence a long time ago. And it struck me in a sense that the war that you're fighting, in a sense, is a war for independence, which you got when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991 without any kind of a struggle. It just collapsed. So in a sense, this is a kind of 30 years later delayed war of independence to get away from the Soviet legacy and from the Russian imperialism. Anyway, that's just my observation. Which you don't have to agree with, by the way. We will talk about it some other time, perhaps. But
you know, I was thinking, if you want me to respond, I was thinking if Ukraine could do better we have really very, very difficult path to democracy. And I was thinking, if we could do better in 31 years. And I understood we would not because of neighboring Russia, because Russia tried to penetrate every sphere of our life, including information space, because this is the way to own people's hearts and minds. And, whenever we would be at the stage where we were when we were 31, Russia would attack because they simply hate something that is different. They hate Ukrainians for trying to join the free world. They hate us for being the biggest democracy in post-Soviet region. They are afraid of something that they don't understand. They want to live in the past. They definitely have imperialistic ambitions, as you mentioned. So I think we did as good as possible, and this is the fight for our very existence.
Yes, thank you. I agree with that completely. Very well stated. Let's talk for a little bit about President Zelensky, who until the war began was really virtually unknown in the United States, and now is a symbol of freedom and independence and democracy around the world, mostly as a positive figure, of course, as a symbol of democracy. He's hated in Russia, he's hated in China, places like that. But the question then I'd like to raise is there anyone else, if something should happen, God forbid, to President Zelensky, to remove him from the scene, who else is there in the Ukrainian political spectrum who might be able to fill the role that he's filling, or a group of people? And we probably wouldn't recognize the names, but it's an issue that has to be faced, I think.
Well, thank you for this really tough question. So first of all, we hope that President Zelensky will be all right. And I actually was asked this question back in March 2022, when the war was in a super hot stage and Russians were staying in near Kiev. And I was asked if I thought that something would happen to the president. And I said that the best thing for the country would be if he stayed alive and he stayed, the president of the country as he must be. And it happened. So I think right now he is, under security and taken care of. And we hope that everything will be all right. Though, of course, fate is always fate. But Ukraine has developed political infrastructure. So the head of the parliament is the person to lead the country in case if something happens to the president. We had this already for 3 or 4 months after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, when the president of the country fled the country because he was pro-Russian, he was very corrupt, and Ukrainians went out on the streets to make him leave the country. So we had a person who was ruling the country for 3 or 4 months before we had transparent elections and elected then President Petro Poroshenko. We have really developed infrastructure, legislative branch, executive branch, legal branch. So Ukraine will function, though our institutions are fragile, but they exist there, and we don't depend only on one person, though we definitely see that our leader is doing more than anyone else to take Ukraine into the future.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, from my own knowledge of Ukrainian history, which is very shallow compared to yours, I know that you have in fact been developing institutions, particularly since the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. And of course, I hope, and I hope all of us hope, that President Zelensky will stay safe and secure and continue to lead Ukraine for as long as he is elected president, as long as he is democratically elected, which brings me to my next question, really, and that is, the war has had the effect of at least rapidly overcoming the political divisions that beset Ukraine since independence. Those who were pro-Russian, those who wanted to look to the EU and the West, and all the kinds of terrible personal attacks and things that you describe in your book so well, that made it very difficult to move forward, have now at least temporarily been removed by the war. The question really is, how likely is that unity to endure after the war is over? Could the divisions, and often at the end of a war, unity that occurs in wartime breaks down. It happened in the United States. It happened in Britain at the end of the war. The opposition took power. I know Ukraine is very different, but there are historical antecedents there. So can you talk about the prospects for continued unity in a post-war period? And finally, part of the same question, is there any possibility that a pro-Russian political movement could ever take hold again in Ukraine as it existed since 1991?
Oh, that's a very good question. Let me start from the second part of this question. Let me say that Russia weaponizes the information, trying to undermine democracies around the world. Ukraine probably was the first test field, but we already see that the same things are happening in different Western democracies, including the United States. And Russia really tried to penetrate our information space and entertainment space. And I'm explaining so many stories of how fake news were actually identifying even my personal image, because Russia created somewhere there online the image of Yulia Mendel, whom I do not know. And through these attacks, Russia tried to undermine the image of President Zelensky, because there were attacks on every member of his team. Talking about that, of course, some of the Ukrainian politicians tried to use the same practices of social media infrastructure to build the same system of influence. So it was quite a hard challenge. But at the same time, we see if Ukraine before the war, it was divided between those politicians who tried still to promote some Russian vision, pro-Russian, worldview in Ukraine, and trying to engage more sympathies because of nostalgia towards Soviet Union. And more and more with every year, we had got politicians and people who wanted to join the European Union space. This division, it was not nearly even balanced, because we had really very, very small this group of pro-Russian politicians. But after the war, I don't think it's absolutely possible, because Ukrainian society does not accept anymore anything pro-Russian. Like, we have people who were speaking Russian and they switch into Ukrainian because they consider that Russian language is the language of terrorists. Many Ukrainians, they do not want to have anything about Russian culture in Ukraine anymore. No songs, no books, no movies, in many ways that project this Russian aggression behavior, for the reason that it's very painful for Ukrainians right now, and they consider that this is all the culture of terrorism. And let me say important things from the occupation that I've heard. People who live in Russian-speaking regions, they suffered most from Russia, who came to denazify so-called Ukraine, right? And they said that they never believed that the Soviet army, Russian army, who was fighting Nazi back in 20th century, actually could turn into fascists by themselves. So right now, I think that Ukrainian politics will be divided into two different directions that don't have anything about geography or values difference anymore, because all of us want to look only in the West. At the same time, some of the politicians try to narrow the Ukrainian identity to some only narrow domestic Ukrainian vision, and many more politicians, including President Volodymyr Zelensky, they try to be more open-minded and to show Ukraine as actually the equal participant of the global construction. The first part of your question was about, oh my God, just remind me, please. Guess I had so many interviews and I forgot. Stephen, sorry.
No, the question is, is whether the unity can remain into the post-war period, basically.
Yes, you're right. Thank you. Yeah,
wartime unity often breaks down. That's why.
Absolutely. But I think that, I will have quite a short answer. I'm explaining in the book that Ukrainian politics has a lot of hot discussions, and it's really like a hot battlefield. A lot of disputes are there, a lot of manipulations, intrigues, and I'm sure that Americans understand very well what it is. But I feel like this is also the part of post-Soviet democracy, because we have the example of Russia, where there are no disputes, no contradictions, no fights, and there is full autocracy and the rule of only one person that leads nowhere but to, I hope, crackdown of Russia, and people suffer there from poverty, and people suffer from no human rights, and they suffer from no freedom of speech, like it doesn't exist in Russia. So I mean, yes, Ukrainian democracy is very, very hot, but at the same time, it's a democracy, and there are different views there, and so there are different fights.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good answer. Let me just say that there is opposition in Russia, but it's been imprisoned. And
Yeah.
Putin has assassinated people and as you know, assassinated journalists and politicians.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
It's going on. It's gotten even worse, of course, since the invasion of Ukraine.
So the dialogue is better, of course.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. But I think that the lively discussion, which should be at the heart of democracy, has to take place within a certain kind of agreement. Because if it gets too heated, then nothing constructive can be done. I think Madeline wanted to jump in. I'm going to...
Maybe we can just move this a little bit.
Okay. I'm going to disappear for a moment.
So there's a question I was thinking about. We've read from time to time in the press, and I follow on Telegram some of the Zelensky's and other messages about what's going on, and there has been a lot of, well, maybe not a lot, but quite enough for me to notice claims that there have been collaborators, there have been people who have betrayed Ukraine, but they are Ukrainian citizens. They may choose to remain in Ukraine. My own knowledge is more about what happened after World War II in Germany and in German-occupied lands. What do you think should be done, can be done, and will be done in Ukraine when the war is over and people start realizing that there were neighbors, there are family members, possibly others who have come back and they believe betrayed the country?
Well, that's a very, very deep question. And yeah, I will be realistic. In every, war and situation, there are those who betray. We had the betrayal and the fact that already is confirmed that is connected to my home region of Kherson. The head of the security service betrayed the region, left the country on 23rd of February, and was caught in Serbia with several millions of euros. And because he left and he was the biggest security organization, like the leading security organization in the region, there was no many people to oppose to Russian soldiers, and also they left the whole information about the whole citizens of the region, which is really very unhelpful, and many people were kidnapped and tortured, and the houses of activists were searched. So this person is already declared to have an accusation, official accusation of betrayal, and I think that he will need to be returned to Ukraine. So he is now detained in Serbia. We are looking forward for all these legal measures to be done so that he can be returned. And of course, there should be the trial. We have developed system of trials in the country, the justice in the country. And I know that already there are a lot of cases when people are accused doing the things that could help Russians to enter Ukraine, majority from those Russian-speaking territories that are under occupation. But of course, there will be more people who are ordinary citizens, and we know such people. And from our previous experience when Russia invaded first Ukraine back in 2014, we know that such people sometimes can leave to Russia and get Russian citizenship and stay in Russia. But I mean, it's a much smaller percent, and it has nothing even close to some parity. For instance, we had one neighbor who lived near our summer house. He had problems with alcohol, and he had big problems with finances, and he was waiting for Russian army to come. And that was very painful for my family, but what could we do? He disappeared. He went to Crimea. As soon as Russians came, he understood that there was only destruction and he didn't have any chance. I know he went to Crimea. I don't know what happened to him after that. Yeah, that's the answer to the question. Thank you.
That's a painful question. So I think we're going to just do one more question now, perhaps, and maybe move a little bit away from the war to take a breath from it. Looking at Ukrainian politics now, and in most recent years, it seems that women still, as politicians, play a rather small role. Yet I assume that the roles of women have changed considerably in these years of war. So I wondered if you would comment on that, and then personally, as you've experienced a change in what it has been to be first a journalist and a spokesperson within Ukraine, and now a very important spokesperson for Ukraine, do you ever think about going into politics yourself? Is that something to think about?
Thank you, Madeline, for these kind words of yours. Definitely more Ukrainian females joined Ukrainian politics after 2014 and took major roles in the parliament. And we have a lot of people in the government right now, females in the government right now. And females really, are bravely joining the battlefield, not only as medical personnel or chefs, but also people who take rifles and go to fight with men. And I was writing for Washington Post the story about females, but also females are defending the so-called rare, for the reason that many females, they started devoting their life to delivering of humanitarian aids, delivering ambulances, and helping with everything what is needed for our army. So females are equally important in this fight. It's not like we are having some kind of accumulation by gender. So the gender gap, if it existed, and it existed, it reduced. Right now, I feel like there are more females in the government of Zelensky than it was at the beginning of 2019 when I entered the government, and when often I was the only female sitting during the negotiations or during important meetings. This is a very difficult question if I want to go to politics. I feel like I'm, already in the circle of politics. For me, it's more about a contribution, not about the position. Politics is changing very much these days. And the more important thing for me is to have freedom and opportunity and ability to help my country, especially during such hard times. So it's more about contribution than position.
And I believe that. Well, thank you. I think the questions are building up from the audience, so we're going to let them have a chance.
Thank you. So
Great.
Shall I find them? Do you see them?
I'll ask them to you just so that we can keep it moving here. So we're doing a mix, just so everyone knows, of pre-submitted questions from the audience and live questions submitted. And thank you to Madeline and Steve for incorporating some of those questions and just helping draw out a really nice discussion. One of the first questions we'll ask here is, how are Ukrainians maintaining hope and morale during these hard, demanding, and scary times?
very difficult. So we are really, in many ways, are exhausted physically, but we are still having high morale for the reason that we have what to fight for. Like for millions and millions of Ukrainians, our country is the value. And I'm sure that you understand what it is, because we belong to our land. We were building it. We were having plans. We were having dreams, in Ukraine. And for us, it's a value. And what we see from Russians, they are literally, we call them orcs, or we call them Russies, and they don't have any motivation to come to Ukraine. Like literally, they show that corruption became the part of Russian identity, because they arrived and they were in such a poor condition. They didn't have fuel, they didn't have food, they didn't have normal uniforms, and they were so desperate about what they saw in Ukraine. Like literally, they were stealing toilets, pans, washing machines. It's ridiculous. I saw the video when they collected the electrical kettles and were putting them on the fire, because they collected them without a wire. They didn't know that the wire should be put in how you say should be actually connected to the electricity. So what I mean, it shows how far Ukraine went further with the developments. Like we did not pay attention much to our everyday life, because we were just living modern, ordinary, civilized life, and we met these orcs who just were greedy about taking all of this from us. They were angry that we are having this life, and they did not think that they needed to take responsibility, and to maintain the relations in their own country, and to maintain democratic way and market economy in their own country. They don't have this in their minds. When they steal, they rob, they kill for everything. So right now our morale is high, especially after the counter-offensive. First it was just a hope. Now we see the result, and our president says that we are preparing new counter-offensives. We see how we regain even small villages every day, and this provides us a feeling that we are doing the correct way, and that we will be able to return all our lands. We are defending our homes, our families. We are defending the value to choose. We are defending the values of the free world. They are coming for nothing, for some material poor goods, and for killing, and in many ways they don't know the reason what they are doing in Ukraine. 54,000 of Russian servicemen have been eliminated already.
Right. Thank you, Yulia. Our next question is connected to grain and wheat. That's an issue that Montanans find really important, because it's a way that we really relate to Ukraine. And we're wondering if you can comment a bit on the status of grain export in Ukraine right now during war.
Okay. First of all, let me say that Ukraine used to be named a breadbasket of Europe, and 400 million of Ukrainians, 400 million of people around the world depend on Ukrainian grain, which is in Asia, in Africa, in South America, but also, other countries, European countries, etc. Up to now, Guterres, the General Secretary of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said that the grain corridor up to now was the biggest achievements in the negotiations between Ukrainian and Russian side. And thanks to the UN mission, and thanks to Turkish President Erdogan, we managed to maintain this issue. And the latest, what I remember, we had over 3 million of tons of grain getting out from Ukraine, and 2/3 of this grain was going to the poorest countries. At the same time, I think it's more right now, because I saw that more ships were coming out. I just don't know the whole number. It's still very little, depending if to compare what Ukraine can offer. But you should understand that at least the third part of Ukrainian lands, agrarians, they did not manage to grow any crops because of war affairs. We're just trying to do our best.
Oh, thank you. We have another question here. What impact will there be if President Putin promotes referendum votes for people to become part of Russia in the occupied territories, as is already being reported.
Right. So they did it for the first time back in 2014 and in Crimea. And in this way, they tried to justify the annexation of Ukrainian peninsula Crimea. This was not recognized around the world, and Ukraine still considers that this is temporarily occupied Ukrainian territory. Ukraine, within the arrival of President Zelensky, Ukraine created the whole platform that united really the leaders of civilized world to stand for returning of Crimea. And during the negotiations in March, this territory really was under the question. And Russian delegation even agreed to maintain the return of Crimea in the next 15 years, which was really surprising. But Putin then declined all the offers and all the negotiated agenda and decided to continue the war. But Crimea, as the latest part already, the part that is annexed and has been annexed for the last 8.5 years, is very high on the agenda. And if before we saw Bucha, we were thinking that we could, try to find some diplomatic solution after we saw Bucha, Irpin, Moshun, Hostomel, all those small towns of Ukraine who became known around the world because of the tortures, because of the killings, all those atrocities. We understand that there is only one way how we can regain back the territories, and it's actually to show to Putin what he understands. He understands only strength. Until he thinks you are strong enough, he's not gonna do anything for you. He's just going to cause fatigue, and maintaining this small military actions, occupying territory further and further. Today Putin wanted to have a speech, and he wanted actually to announce the fake referenda on the occupied territories. And then we had European leaders, the United States, Turkish president going out saying, we're not going to recognize this. For Ukrainians, it's not going to change anything. We understand that they are going to declare it's Russian territory, but how is that possible it's Russian territory if no one in the world recognizes it? So with any means, even if they do this, for us, it's not legal. For us, it's Ukrainian territory, and we're going to get it back.
All right. This one, I'm not sure if it's really lighter, but it's sort of taking a different turn. We have a couple of audience questions about your experience serving as press secretary, particularly what was your most memorable learning experience?
Yeah. It's so much here. I will surprise you. Let me just, turn off from where and surprise you. It's that everyone sees President Zelensky right now as the speaker for the country, and his speeches are really emotional, and he talks to media a lot. At the same time, it's just like a small intrigue for you in the book. When I arrived there, the team that brought President Zelensky to power, they believed that we did not need to organize any interviews with the president. We did not need maintain relations with media. We were, as press service, banned to respond to media inquiries and even to comment on something. And I was really fighting that, because at some point it was not in any way similar to some democratic government. It was just some kind of castle of intrigues. There is no, that was the first chief of staff of Zelensky administration. He is not serving anymore, but that was the fight that I was given. And I was 32-year-old female, and there were males who were much richer. They were much more powerful. They all were fighting for influence on Volodymyr Zelensky. So it was a difficult fight, but I was very happy that President understood that democracy could be maintained only if we develop transparent relations with media. And I'm very happy right now to understand that I was there at the very beginning fighting for this and contributing actually to the development of these relations.
All right, our next question here. What lessons should the US draw from Ukraine about confronting authoritarians before it comes to war?
Be dynamic, be flexible, be strong, and do everything in time. And don't dig tranchees when you are killed from the sky.
All right. This is a question that I think everyone will probably want to know the answer to and have been asking a lot. It's basically, what actions can I do to express support for Ukrainian people impacted by the war? And how can we best support Ukraine from here?
Well, thank you for this question. There are so many ways, and it also depends on, opportunities from the person. And I know that there are a lot of people who cannot contribute money. And for Ukrainians, it's even enough if you have a flag somewhere showing just that you remember. Because if you see the flag and post it somewhere, then people around will see. And this is very meaningful. Yesterday, I was walking in Washington and I saw this yellow and blue plate with saying "Stand with Ukraine," and I left there a brooch saying "Slava Ukraine." Just that the person sees that as a Ukrainian, I appreciate this. Also, there are a lot of organizations. If you want to donate, I'm not the one to tell you where to do this, but just check that they are doing, the right thing. But also, we would ask, President Zelensky is talking to American people for the reason that with politicians, it's often controversial. They can say it's bureaucracy here, there is China, there is that, there is that. But maybe you as people, you have influence on your politicians. So it's not always about money, just about defending the position of those who need the help there through the ocean, across the ocean. There are multiple ways, and among them are those to tell the story, to support Ukraine, to have the memory, to share the story, to make politicians do the right thing. These are not easy. This is your energy that you put there, but we would be very grateful for this.
And we've seen a lot of those flags flying in Missoula. So we'd be happy to know. The next question we have, and I think this will probably be our last one. Have there been, or could you comment on the responses to Russian aggression by other countries who have been or may become targets of Russia, such as Georgia or Finland or Azerbaijan?
Yeah, they are very different, to be frank. And yes, Russia borders a lot of countries, but even those countries who are not bordering Russia, they still are afraid that they can be the next targets, especially when we talk about those countries that experienced communist regime. Poland, for instance, Moldova, Baltic states such as Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, of course, Sweden. Putin made such a big mistake by invading Ukraine. He was afraid of NATO expansion, and instead of this, we see that really NATO started expanding, taking strongest members, new members, for the reason that the world needs to be united against this autocracy, and for the reason that we cannot allow Russia to expand. For many politicians and Ukrainians, Georgia was more disappointing for the reason that there is some Russian influence there. But at the same time, I see that they also are having disputes there, and this is a good tendency. And we've heard that the president of the country was standing for Ukraine, and this matters for us a lot. But if you look at much smaller, even Armenia, there in the Caucasus, they used to vote against Ukraine all the time in the United Nations and all the international organizations before the war. And it was clear because they were so much dependent on Russia. Literally, like Russia can, just as a dragon, just put their hand and, there will be no Armenia. It's so small. But at the same time, they started voting for Ukraine and against Russian aggression. And this is what it means, because this is very small but very strong voice of Armenia, which we really appreciate. And we see that even China and India, they still doubt, they are not very outspoken about their position, obviously. But we've heard that on the latest meeting with Putin, the head of India said that it's not time for war. And the head of China sorry. First of all, Erdogan, the head of Turkey, didn't want to praise Putin for the war, and China was going against the war. In some while, China definitely plays its games there. It's clear. I'm sorry, the telephone is dying. It's clear, but at the same time, they're not promoting the war. Thanks God. I think there are their own reasons for behaving differently, and the thing is that President Zelensky tries to appeal literally to every nation around the world, and that was in many ways very helpful, and we're really very grateful for all the civilized nations that really stand with us right now. We are sacrificing our lives for this. We hope that people can live through this inflation and energy crisis. We've been living with blackmails and threats from Russia for 31 years. But our winter is going to be worse than any other winter in any other country this year. I hope this makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much. And I did want to just open up, do you have any sort of brief final comment you would like to make to our audience here?
If you read the book and if you enjoy the book, go to Amazon and review it. But anyway, I wanted to say that I'm very grateful for giving me this platform, and that I see there are like around 400 of you, and this means so much because I understand this is evening and probably you are tired and you're just sitting online listening to the story from across the ocean. And this is, this shows how personal this story for every one of you. And I guess for us as Ukrainians, it is already the meaningful thing, and I would ask you not to forget. And I hope that we will finish this war as fast as possible and everyone will sign with the relief. But up to now, thank you for devoting this hour to this story, and thank you for organizing this conversation. If I can be to your service, please let me know.
Right. Well, we also want to say thank you so much for joining us, Yulia. This has been a great time to just hear from your perspective and hear your story and the bigger story of Ukraine right now. And thank you to our moderators, Drs. Madeline and Stephen Levine, for joining tonight and aiding in this conversation, this dialogue. As we're wrapping up, we just want to reiterate how valuable it is to continue to learn as a community about Ukraine's unique identity, about the full scope of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And by engaging in this and other related dialogues and community events, you are all showing a vital support for Ukraine. And we hope that you will continue learning, spreading awareness, and offering whatever support you can to Ukraine and Ukrainians. And in addition to Mrs. Mendel's book, which you should all buy and read, we also are posting a list of reading recommendations in the chat. In addition, if you want to keep learning about Ukraine and what's going on. Yulia, it has been an honor to hear from you. Thank you so much for sharing your personal, professional insights and experiences. And we just want to say again, thank you, all of you in the audience, for joining us today. And a recording of this webinar will be available tomorrow by 5 p.m. Montana time on our website. And please keep an eye out for our upcoming dialogues that have a focus on China as well. Thank you all and take care.
Thank you so much.